Welcome back. Now, debug messages aren't the only debug utilities that we have in the engine. We can also draw debug shapes as well. Now, before we do that, I'm going to clear my level out just a bit because it's getting a little cluttered. I'm going to go ahead and remove most of these objects. I'm going to remove those static meshes we dragged in. Those are not drone actors. In fact, I'm going to delete all but my one drone actor, which I've renamed to Drone 1 in my outliner. And I'll go ahead and just remove these other static mesh objects as well so that I don't have anything distracting me. Now let's go back to BP Drone. I'd like to break the wire going to print string and highlight these nodes and just move them up and out of my way for a minute. And I'm going to draw a debug shape. We can right click and type draw debug. And notice that there are many shapes to choose from when it comes to drawing debug shapes. I'm going to draw a debug sphere. Now, draw debug sphere is also development only, much like the print string node. And I'm going to hook this up to event begin play so that we can draw one of these. Now, notice I like to straighten my wires a bit, but sometimes you can't quite get them straight. But you can highlight multiple nodes and hit the Q key to straighten them out. So I'll be doing that quite a bit from now on. Now, draw debug sphere requires a number of inputs. It wants to know the center location of the sphere that we want to draw. It also wants to know a radius, a number of segments, a line color, a duration, and a thickness for the lines. Now, if we leave everything at the defaults except duration, we can't draw it at a duration of 0. We need to draw it for some duration. I'm going to draw it for 60 seconds. Let's see what happens if we draw this debug sphere in begin play. I'm going to press play, and we're actually inside that debug sphere. I have to move away from the origin because I started off right there at 0, 0, 0, which is the location we passed in for our sphere location. So this is what a debug sphere looks like with those parameters. Remember that we had a radius of 100, segments were 12, and the line color was white. Now we can adjust the radius. Let's say we'd like it a little smaller. We'll give it a radius of 50. And I'll change the segments from 12 to 24. We'll see what that looks like. Let's go ahead and press play. And there's my sphere. It's smaller. It has a radius of 50 units. And it's more round, more detailed. It has more segments. It has 24 segments around its equator. So the more segments, the more lines, and the more detail for that sphere. And of course, thickness is the thickness of the lines. Let's give it a thickness of 2, press play, and we see that it's drawn with thicker lines. So we can customize these debug shapes quite a bit. Now I'm going to change the radius back to 100. And instead of drawing this sphere at 0, 0, 0, I'd like to draw it at the location of my drone. Now, we know how to get the location of our drone, don't we? Why don't you go ahead and get the location of the drone and pass that in to draw debug sphere. That's right. You right-clicked and typed get actor location. We'll get that node. We don't need to pass anything in because self is the default value for target. And we can drag that into center. And now we'll be drawing the debug sphere at our drone's location. Let's go ahead and press play. And now we see that the sphere is drawn around our drone. It looks like it's in a cage. So debug shapes are another way to verify that things are working properly. This proves to us that get actor location is returning the proper value. We already proved that with our debug message. Now we're proving it with a debug sphere as well. Now I encourage you to right-click, type draw debug, and trying out some of the other debug shapes just to get some practice playing around with them. But for this video, we're going to try one more, and that's the debug arrow. Now the debug arrow has even more inputs than draw debug sphere. Let's hook that on up to the output execution pin for draw debug sphere. And draw debug arrow has 2 vector inputs, a line start and a line end. So these are the starting and ending points for our debug arrow that we'd like to draw. Now for line end, I'm just going to use my actor location. I'm going to take this node, I'm going to duplicate it with Control D, and I'm going to hook it on up to line end. And I'm going to change the duration to 60 seconds so it doesn't go away for a minute, and I'm going to press play. And there's our debug arrow. It's really small and it's black. That's the default behavior. But we can change things. I'm going to change the thickness to 3, and I'm going to change the line color to a reddish color. I'm going to press play, and there it is. It's going from the origin all the way up to our drone. Now, we can't see the end of the arrow, but it does look like an arrow. We can see that by hiding a couple things. For one, I want to skip the draw debug sphere for a minute. I'm going to hold Alt and break these wires and drag that draw debug sphere down a bit and bypass it by hooking up draw debug arrow straight to begin play here. So we're no longer going to draw that debug sphere. We're only going to draw the debug arrow. And I'd also like to hide my drone mesh. We can do that. We can select the drone mesh, make sure it's selected in the components panel. And here in details, if we search for rendering, we'll see that under rendering, we have a couple of options related to visibility. Visible is whether or not we can actually see it. We can uncheck that and it goes away. But we want hidden in game. This is going to allow us to keep it visible here in the editor, but we can check hidden in game. And now in the game, in the Pi session, we won't be able to see it. So let's press play here. And now that drone mesh is gone. The drone is still there. We can see it in the outliner, but the drone mesh is hidden in game. And we can see that arrow. It even has an arrowhead there. So that's how we can draw debug arrows. And it's important to go back to hidden in game and uncheck that. Otherwise, you're going to forget about it, and then you won't know why you can't see your drone in the game. So I'm going to go ahead and set that back to visible. And in the event graph, we now understand our draw debug arrow utility. So we have 3 developer tools under our belt. We have print string, we have draw debug sphere, and we have draw debug arrow. And we also learned about how to get our actor location, which comes in the form of a vector, which we'll talk about in depth very shortly. We're going to talk about what vectors are and what you can do with them. We're going to get a little bit of a math primer in the videos to come. But now we have some really useful things that we can use while developing the game, and we'll be using them throughout this course. Excellent job, and I'll see you in the next video.